The women's rights movement.
Concerns and grievances from the women's rights movement was that women wanted equal jobs and equality between men and women. Women wanted a bigger role in their careers and everyday lives instead of doing the minimal and small tasks. And women wanted control over their own bodies. It started in the late 1960s. Some began to criticize positions of minimal jobs and started to question women's conventional responsibility in American culture. It took place on college campuses, and it was built out of other social movements.
Betty Friedan was the main ally for the fight of women's rights. She started NOW, the National Organization for Women, in 1966 by bringing together feminists with the goal of setting up task force to work on education, employment, equal pay, and other women's issues. Friedan was the first president of NOW from 1966 to 1970. Friedan wrote a best-selling book in 1963 called The Feminine Musique. This book talked about women's frustrations with society's expectations. Her main goal was to push women to fight for change. New York Radical Women and Red Stockings were feminist groups on the East Coast that was sparked by NOW, along with many others.
The original goal of what some like to call the first wave of feminism was the right to vote for females. The passing of the 19th Amendment was a start, but as time went on and more individuals joined the movement, more goals became prevalent. This is what some referred to as the second wave of feminism, in which includes social goals such as rethinking how feminists are viewed through history, desexing the English language, economic goals which included equal access to employment and education, as well as a married woman's right to her own property, and political goals such as how much a woman should be allowed to participate politically and a woman's right to an abortion. As a result of the tens of years of protests and rallies, the women's rights movement succeeded in liberalizing divorce laws. Employers were barred from firing pregnant women, and women's studies programs were created in colleges and universities. Record numbers of women ran for and started winning political offices. In 1972, Congress passed Title IX of the Higher Education Act, which prohibited discrimination on the basis of sex in any educational program in which were receiving federal funds. And in 1973, in its controversial ruling on Roe v. Wade, the United States Supreme Court legalized abortion.
Some tactics and strategies were feminists protested in the streets by leading rallies, hearings, marches, sit-ins, and legislative sessions. Women protested at the Miss America pageant. The Feminine Musique book was a strategy to reach out to women like housewives for them to realize women are being discriminated against and need change. This book began to attract thousands of women to join the NOW organization.
The actions and achievements was that the Equal Pay Act of 1963 was signed by President John F. Kennedy and put into law, which prohibits employers from paying men and women different wages. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed discrimination based on gender. In 1967, President Johnson amended Executive Order 11246, which included sex discrimination on the list of prohibited employment discrimination. In 1973, feminist lawyers won a Supreme Court decision, Roe v. Wade. The justices ruled that women had the constitutional right to choose to have an abortion. The Supreme Court ruled in Griswold v. Connecticut that a law against birth control violated the right to marital privacy. That decision led many women to use contraceptives.
A major component of the backlash held by the women often involved in the women's rights movement was that the white feminists failed to acknowledge the struggles of discriminated groups such as black women, lesbians, and working-class women. This ultimately became a controversial discussion due to the fact that the women involved in the movement had seemed to be promoting equal rights for all, when in actuality there was obvious injustice within the movement itself. This discrimination created an unforgettable backlash of radical feminism, veering from the original objectives of the movement and causing women to fix the inequalities that the movement created by opening the doors for liberal feminism.
The connection to today is the fight for women's rights is still prevalent today as organizations such as the National Organization for Women and other individuals are holding protests all across the country against the possible overturn of Roe v. Wade. This overturn would result in women losing their right to accessible health care that they fought for years to gain and eventually did in 1973. These protests for women's equality still continue today because many are split over whether or not the law should continue to be in full force. These are our references, and thank you for watching and listening.